This is what's in it for me. Helping the entire world secure basic needs so you can concentrate on your financial growth. Helping you find what options are available and helping provide free resources. Your host holds degrees in business, political science, and sociology, and he's an expert in socialization and stratification. This is What's in It for Me, and this is your host, Dr. Kenneth Pierce.
Hello, good afternoon, and welcome back. Happy Saturday, October 2nd. That's 10-2, and I have something for you to tend to today. If you consider yourself a brand manager, a brand ambassador with SAY-tama, we're here again with my lovely co-host, Doreen. Say hello.
Hello.
Well, what do you have for us today, D?
I'm glad that you mentioned that. I really want to talk about this brand ambassador thing again. Russ impressed upon us on CryptoDeb's YouTube channel. I think it was. She did a live AMA with Russ, and he said that we are all brand ambassadors. I'm really interested in that, so I was hoping we could talk more about that today.
All right. Well, let's start with the basic question, I guess, so we're kind of lay the foundation. When you hear brand ambassador, what does that mean to you?
Well, if you are an ambassador of something, then you take on responsibility for spreading awareness or introducing that to your circles or however large this space is. But in order to do that, you have to be responsible for that brand, whatever it is. It is meant to be recognizable. It's meant to be consistent, and it's meant to be a symbol for something very specific. So if our job is to take it out into the world, we have to take something that's very well packaged and try to remain consistent with it.
Sure. And when we think about something that's going to be very well packaged, although people will say that we're in the wild west days of crypto, and if that's the case, 4 months in, I suppose we're still in the wild west days of Saitama. But some of these things do need to come from the top down, as we discussed in previous podcast episode. When you have a development team that formally organizes as an LLC, as did Saitama LLC, and it takes kind of control and legal ownership over the brand. We're no longer really talking about just a token that's going to move in the way that the community pushes it, but instead a token that's going to move in a direction that is dictated from the leadership team. So with that in mind, I think one of the first things we need to be mindful of, in fact, is the very basic question of the pronunciation of SAY-tama or SAY-tama, depending on where you stand. And it's not as if other major brands don't deal with the same general issue. I think of Nike and Nike, or Porsche and Porsche, or Maybach and Maybach. And maybe it's one thing, though, when the general public pronounces things differently, but the expectation is that the executive team, corporately at Nike, I'm sure that they have a standard. And if you are making a commercial or otherwise discussing Nike, then you're going to follow that standard. So I think it's important for the executive team, in this case, Saitama LLC or Saitama LLC, to let us know where they stand, to be consistent on their level, and let us know how they would like that to go, so that we're all on one accord.
Yeah, you know how much I love language and symbols, and I'd be a better perfectionist about these things if I wasn't so busy being a mom or busy being lazy. I don't know which one of the two.
No comment.
But Michael Thompson said on somebody's stream some time ago, and this really, I think this is really when I was bought into this thing. He said that he spends a lot of his time, and we should spend time on Zoom with our family and friends, for instance, and get them on board. And that's when I really think that I stepped up because I've done that. Um, but for that reason, I've chosen my own pronunciation and I stick to it as much as possible because as soon as someone says to me, now which one is it, Saitama or Saitama, I can imagine the looks on their face. Girl, please, like, what are you talking about? Like, you can't even stay consistent. And so I try to stay very consistent in my pronunciation.
And that's even before we have to explain the process of purchasing, right?
Exactly.
But at the very least, we should be able to agree. Whether you're saying Saitama or Saitama, or whether we ever resolve this issue, I think at the bare minimum, we should agree at this point that you shouldn't be saying Saitama or Saitama Inu.
Oh yeah, the Inu has to go away. Inu makes you think a lot of things, and we want to distinguish our brand. If I say Saitama or Saitama, at least for now, you know what I'm talking about. But the Inu has to go away. You know what though? When I think about it, let me say this one more thing. You called it sort of the wild west of crypto, or at least for a company so young, the wild west of Saitama. Maybe there's some benefit to this kind of tit for tat. It certainly showed up as number one for you, but I like to think about small talk. People talking about the weather. Nobody really cares what the weather is, but it gives them something to talk about. Fodder for the chit chat machine. So maybe for now there is some function in being able to generally talk about it. If not, it's the first thing that people can talk about. The buzz is good.
If you believe that all press is good press, perhaps
Yeah.
that works out. But the flip of that, at least the potential downside to it, is that the discussion could be the lack of consistency, and that's not what you want to be remembered by.
Yeah, we have to be careful about that.
And on a related note, moving along to the second point is logos, the use of logos. So, if we're going to be brand ambassadors, we should be on one accord with regard to logos are being used. But I guess that's also tricky because unlike some organizations, we have to also realize and respect the fact that Saitama LLC is going to want to have some say over whether or not we have permission to use logos and whether or not they're going to trademark the logos, which I'm assuming is probably not too far away, given what I glean from the direction of the devs and Russ in particular.
Yeah, they're definitely going to have to figure this out, and we're then going to have to adjust. Um, to go along with this perfectionist thing that I think about, that I try to hold on to. I think I used to be a brand manager in my former life. I'm a stickler on style guides and things like that. The first time I ever realized that, companies or institutions have style guides, I've been very careful about, um, the colors that are inside or outside of the scheme of the colors that they choose, or not skewing something or cropping something. I've worked at a lot of colleges and universities, and so that thing is really important to me. There are rules to how they want things to be. And as brand ambassadors, we've got to manage the consistency. There's a lot of trust built into the consistency and the visualization of symbols and brands. That's how we know if something is authentic or fake. That's how we know what to trust and what not to trust. And so there's a certain amount of creativity we may want to take, but let's not go overboard with that, because we want people to trust that brand. I don't know. In this digital world, in the world of crypto, what the community does is important. Like, we operate in a Saitama inspired kind of way, right? So what do we do with that in this space?
Well, I think that, certain elements, I'm sure that any brand is willing to overlook certain things as long as ultimately the brand is not being spoiled and they deem the activity to be in the best interest of that brand. So if we were fans of Apple and we had a fans of Apple group, and maybe we use the logo, perhaps they wouldn't give us a ding if we had a million members in our group and we were talking about going to buy Apple all the time. Maybe they'd let it go. But I think part part of what's problematic in this case is you have channels, including this one, a podcast, that are literally monetizing the discussion of Saitama and other cryptos and other assets generally. And you have to then ask the question, when you're dealing with the situation of monetizing your personal brand on the back of the Saitama brand, what then needs to come into place that maybe wouldn't happen in some other environments?
I think you had this, you were talking about this the other day, talking about bootlegging, right?
Yeah. So as we think about bootlegging, um, we you have to think about the use of logos and whether or not you are creating and selling unauthorized merchandise. That might mean clothing, that might mean, mugs, keychains, NFTs, anything that you may create that either you don't have the express permission of Saitama LLC to create, or anything that might be created in such a way where your product is inconsistent with the quality of the brand. We're not doing the brand any favors if we're doing that. And on top of that, you're potentially setting yourselves up for legal action.
Definitely that one. Russ always talks about making sure that he doesn't create problems in the long run. We were talking about this timing of when he can answer questions or drop bombs. He has to be careful with that too. But I think that we have to be careful with that too. I think we do need to take this a bit seriously. We want to have fun and create a buzz, but we have to be careful with this. One, to avoid the confusion, but also to avoid creating serious problems down the road. And sort of in line with what Russ says. If I had a brand, if I were a celebrity, if I were a company, and I cared about my own brand management, then I would certainly care about partnering with a company who potentially lets their own brand run a bit wild, right? So there is something about us being in the community, like you said, and friends of Apple, the wolf pack. There's something that can be identifiable as the wolf pack, where we may be a slightly inconsistent in whatever it is we do, and as long as people can distinguish what is Saitama LLC and their conglomerate from what is the wolf pack, maybe there's some leeway there.
Sure.
But we don't want to create the sense that we get to run wild with it, because that may create problems for how they can convince people that they can be trusted with somebody else's brand. So we have to do what I like to call make good faith efforts, to not put them in weird positions.
Yeah, I mean, if just read the tea leaves, if the same man, and this is to bolster your point, D, if the same man that's telling us that they won't release certain information about potential partners, endorsers, etc., until all their I's are dotted and T's are crossed, then believe that at some point he's going to be just as passionate about pursuing others that are infringing on the Saitama brand.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
So truthfulness is my next point. YouTube channels, some of the YouTube channels I watch, that you watch with me, D, they don't necessarily, I don't think they have any kind of nefarious intent, but they don't necessarily always promote and release the most accurate information. This might be sometimes inaccuracies as it pertains to the percent gain or growth, or maybe even some expectation of Saitama going to $1,000 per token by January. Clearly, I'm exaggerating, but Saitama to a penny, Saitama to whatever by December. All this is, if you're honest to yourself. I don't think that anyone believes that, even if we all wish it were to be the case. And I think that when we overstate our growth, when we overstate, the percent growth in the month of September or the last couple of weeks or the value of a token or what we perceive to be the upcoming value of a token, that what we wind up doing is creating a deleterious effect on on the brand and discouraging people from wanting to be a part of what we're doing.
You know what? The one of the things that you taught me about this idea of going to the moon is, what does the moon look like? Like, how does the moon look?
Yeah.
It's not always going to be a penny. It's not always going to be a dollar. For different projects, moon is something else, right? I think this generally goes along still with the showing a good faith effort as an ambassador. A simple "don't quote me on this" can go a long way in letting people know that I want to say something, but I am being careful about how I put out information on behalf of this company. And I think it's important to be able to show that good faith effort. Part of the culture of this thing is speculative. Like,
Mhm.
we are projecting all the time. We're reading charts and trying to predict the future on something that is not very predictable. So the problem though is that the people who are listening to you, and we know this, your memory doesn't keep those small details. Your memory doesn't keep in line that was somebody speculating or that was someone's opinion. They just keep the piece of information that was interesting to them.
Sure.
And if anybody sort of, you know, gives that the misattribution, did I use that? If you attribute something that was speculative to something that, someone says that you trust, then you might take that as truth and create your own disappointment or your own distrust for some impression that you made up in your head. And it's really hard to reverse those kinds of things. And this is when all this gets, really fascinated. Your pop was on Jake Gagan's show just the other day, talking about this.
Shout out, Jake.
Shout out to Jake and your pop.
Shout out, Pop.
I'm talking about the GameStop thing on Reddit.
Mm-hmm.
Big stuff happening within a group. And while on the one hand, groups can come together and do amazing things, the fear and the reason why this brand ambassador role is important to me, I think, is that we could turn this whole ship around the wrong way just by saying the wrong thing.
Yeah, despite the best efforts of management, despite the best efforts of, when I mean management, the devs, SAY-tama LLC, if we are roguely representing the token, then it could rub people the wrong way and have them not want to participate. And then that's that. And then we all, for those of us who are in this for any combination of the social benefits and the financial benefits, all of it can go down the tube if we don't treat this thing with the respect it deserves.
Right. We have to follow. We just have to be really careful about what we say.
Absolutely. So with that in mind, that leads me to the final point of today, and that is message discipline. So if we hear, through the AMAs, which we determined should be more like Wolfpack updates, but as long as they're called AMAs, we will treat them and respect them as such. If the message from SAY-tama LLC is whatever the particular thing is at the time, so I'll go with the last thing I remember reading on Twitter was Russ announcing a relationship with Willie D. So if Russ says, "Hey man, shout out Willie D. Thanks for meeting me and having this conversation and getting on board," and you see a tweet from Willie D. If Russ finds that significant to talk about, then we should find it.
That's what we should be talking about.
Exactly. Now, and that doesn't mean that we all have to take the same angle. We don't all have to agree. We don't all have to parrot the exact same words. But if this is an important part, if we believe that the dev team, that management is strategic, and we trust Russ, hashtag let Russ cook. If we believe that, then we should go ahead and just follow suit, because the benefit to us all is, if we're all talking generally about the same thing, then we're going to get a wider reach just because we have a better chance of trending in a particular topic as it pertains to SAY-tama.
Yeah, the question about these tier one exchanges, comes to mind. One of the things that I remember at the end of the AMA on Friday, Russ had come in the beginning, and he had to run. He was talking about sort of his lack of enthusiasm about the exchanges, and he'd put out a qualifying tweet about this, just to make sure that there's no confusion. He doesn't have a lack of enthusiasm because exchanges are not important, but he believes that whether or not we are, or when we are listed on these exchanges, that he puts that in its appropriate place. This is way more than a token. And so having it listed on an exchange, that's important, but he's got other stuff that we need to be paying attention to. So you said it, we don't have to agree. Some of us might believe that that's super important and that we need to be talking about this. But when we want to push that, or when we want to talk about something that is not in line with the level of appropriateness or sort of the ranking of priorities, then we have to be careful about how we're pushing it, even letting people know that this is where I'm coming from, at the very least, so that we don't create a space of going against where that message is. Because full circle, we started talking about SAY-tama or SIGH-tama. I've got my own reasons for why I try to be consistent with the pronunciation as SAITama. But if Russ and the devs decided at some point that it is SAITama, and that's that, then that's that. One is the city, one is this. Simple as that. I changed the way I say it.
I think the bottom line here is, if we want to do what's best for the token, for the community, we need to be careful of what we're doing, what we're saying, follow our cues, and generally speaking, let Russ cook.
You've been listening to What's in It for Me. In order to concentrate on your financial growth, first you need the basics: food, water, warmth, rest, safety, security. And with Dr. Kenneth Pierce's help, you're on your way. We truly hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. The show will be back soon.
Yep.
But in the meantime, visit the website at epicnonprofit.org. Take care of yourself, and we'll see you soon.